Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at a deck that I've been experimenting with and had some mild success with, and that's going to be the Red Flare deck. So Red Flare is exactly what it sounds. It's basically just taking blue flares and applying a lot of red cards to it. The red cards that we're going to be utilizing is in the deck just to try to help its overall damage potential on top of its draw power, so that way we could try to make our plays and our deck as consistent as we possibly can for when we're trying to combo off, because this deck is kind of designed to be more in line with how a OTK deck wants to play, but it has more potential than just being a OTK combo deck, and it has some pretty decent levels of flexibility based on what type of cards you see and how the game has progressed and developed. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, because I'm going to be running a red core and red package, I'm going to be utilizing the Guilmon draw engine. So Gigimon, being the Digitama that facilitates this, allows our Guilmons to draw a card when we attack, and that's what we're trying to gain out of this engine, is just the extra consistency this adds on top of the chip damage and potential we want to deal as early as we possibly can. And then as far as the rookies go, I'm going to be running the Guilmon package that usually is accompanied with the Guilmon draw engine, which is 4 copies of the promo Guilmon. So the promo Guilmon has a when attacking ability to draw us a card, so if we pair that up with our Digitama, then with this card we're going to be swinging and drawing 2 cards, which is just a decent amount of consistency off of our rookie, so that way we could try to find our parts and pieces to be able to combo off. And then the last rookie of the deck is just going to be the other Guilmon that usually this engine is ran with, and that's going to be 4 copies of Guilmon X Antibody. So Guilmon X Antibody is in here not necessarily for its inheritable ability, more so for the fact that we could cycle it on top of a Guilmon, so transactionally it's going to be the same if we use the Guilmon on the field to be able to digivolve into this card and swing and gain that card draw off of our Gigimon egg. Then his when digivolving ability actually can and does matter, because it's helping us be able to delete low-level Digimon, which ideally is going to be the rookie floodgates, so that way we can enable our plays to begin with, so we can combo off when we need to. Next, on to the level 4s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of the Blue Flare Greymon. So the Blue Flare Greymon is just another Greymon by name to digicross into our MetalGreymon, on top of the fact that he actually is a pretty decent searching tool in of himself, allowing us to try to grab up to 2 Blue Flare traded Digimon off the top 4. It's also an alternative way to be able to grab back our MetalGreymons, so that way we could try to make sure that we have our MetalGreymon, which is one of the key core parts of the deck, to make sure we could try to deal as much damage as we possibly can. Then the fact that it does have an on-delete ability of save if we have a tamer set up is pretty nice at being able to possibly utilize this card as material for our MetalGreymon. And on top of that, if we don't see the starter deck Greymon, then we still have some pretty decent damage potential utilizing this card to allow our Blue Flare traded Digimon, which is going to be either our MetalGreymon or our ZeigGreymon, to be able to multi-attack. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of MailBirdramon. So MailBirdramon is mostly just going to chill in your hand to be used for material when we're going to digicross into our MetalGreymon, but he still has some pretty decent usability, allowing us to have an alternative way to be able to grab back our MetalGreymons, which is pretty nice. He has that same on-delete ability of save, so if we need to, we could be aggressive with this card after grabbing back our MetalGreymon from hard playing hits, and on top of that, it allows our Blue Flare traded Digimon, which again is going to be either our MetalGreymon or our ZeigGreymon, to be able to possibly stunlock the opponent's Digimon as long as they have enough Digimon on their field, so that way we could try to take away some of their offensive and defensive capabilities, mostly their defensive capabilities. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 3 copies of the starter deck Greymon. So the starter deck Greymon is in here for 2 reasons. One, his name is Greymon, so that way we could use him as a material to digicross into our Blue Flare MetalGreymon. And then the second reason is his inheritable ability to give our MetalGreymon, which is going to be Security Attack Plus, so that way we could try to deal as much damage as quickly as we possibly can. Next, on to the level 5s, and speaking of our MetalGreymon, I'm going to be running 4 copies of the Blue Flare MetalGreymon. So this card is a really powerful card just because his Digicross 2 ability utilizing Greymon and MailBirdramon means that we could essentially hard to play this card for 3, so that's pretty cheap and efficient, especially if we have a memory fixing tamer on our field to set us to 3, means that we're always going to be able to play this card and gain full value off of his ability, which his on-play ability by default that we're trying to gain is the Rush ability, so when we play this card, we can attack right away. Then on top of that, he has the upside of being able to stun lock the opponent's Digimon with equal to or less sources than this Digimon to possibly take away some of the opponent's offensive and defensive capabilities as well. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of MetalGreymon X Antibody as the last level 5 Digimon of the deck. So this is actually a pretty decent card to use just because most of the time we're going to be digivolving him for 0 on top of a MetalGreymon, which our Blue Flare MetalGreymon is a MetalGreymon, so it works in tandem with this card to be able to gain full benefits and value off of this card, which is pretty decent at allowing us to deal a lot of damage relatively quickly because we're going to be gaining plus 3000 DP, which is going to be lasting until the end of the opponent's turn, and an extra security attack plus. So by default, if we use this card in the most ideal stack, which is going to be with its starter deck Greymon and MetalGreymon, then we're going to be able to use this card to swing for 11k for 3 checks. Next, on to the level 6s, I'm going to be running 3 copies of ZeigGreymon. So ZeigGreymon is a pretty decent card just because he has his own levels of usability. So mostly what we're trying to use him for is his when digivolving ability to unsuspend this Digimon, so that way we could gain some extra attacks, and if he has any buffs transferred over from Greymon or from MetalGreymon X Antibody, then it just makes this card even stronger. You do have to pay attention to the fact that we do need a Blue Flare traded Digimon in his Digivolution sources, and the opponent does need to have 2 or more Digimon to be able to gain the 2 memory, but digivolving him for 1 on top of a MetalGreymon X Antibody or digivolving him for 0 on top of our MetalGreymon is still pretty strong of a maneuver to do, allowing us to have some extra capabilities to be as aggressive as we possibly can. We're not necessarily caring about his on-delete ability of save, just because we're trying to actually use him to win the game with, and same thing for his inheritable, we don't care about that at all, because we're just using him as an extender to try to deal as much damage as we possibly can, and the fact that he could digivolve on both of our level 5s makes him super useful and valuable. And then when it comes to level 7s, I'm only going to be running 2 copies of Omnimon. So this is the BT5 Blitz Omnimon, and he's just a classic alternative win condition, just because, like ZeigGreymon, when we digivolve up into him, we're going to unsuspend this Digimon, paired up with his when digivolving ability of Blitz, means that we could unsuspend and swing, even if the memory goes over on the opponent's side, which ideally, if we're digivolving all the way up into Omnimon, they should have 0 cards in their security, allowing us to be able to use Omnimon to swing for the game with. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Gravity Crush. So because we're playing a decent amount of both colors, we don't necessarily want to try to run a memory boost just because there's a high chance of that memory boost at not being able to be super useful. So we do need an alternative way to be able to gain some extra memory, and Gravity Crush allowing us to gain 2 memory for 0 is super valuable to allow us to be able to make plays that weren't possible, even if the downside seems like it's pretty bad losing 2 memory. If we're using this card on the winning turn, then the downside isn't a downside at all, and the worst thing about the card is the fact that it doesn't have any security effects. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Hero of the Skies. So Hero of the Skies is just in here just because it is a 2-costed red option that allows us to draw 2, so that's pretty much all it's good for, is just some good cheap cycling. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Heir of Dragons. So Heir of Dragons, like Hero of the Skies, is just another cheap option to allow us to draw 2, so that way we have multiple effects to be able to try to just draw when we're not doing much of anything, to try to make sure we could try to find our combo pieces and combo off from there. This card actually does have the added benefit where if we have a Greymon on the field, then we get to delete one of the opponent's low-level Digimon as well, having some alternative forms of removal. And unlike Hero of the Skies, this actually does have a security ability to activate its main, so out of our security, it's still going to allow us to draw cards, which is why I'm favoring running more copies of this in Fireball over something like Hero of the Skies. And speaking of Fireball, next I'm going to be running 4 copies of Fireball. So Fireball is another cheap draw option to allow us to draw 2 for 2, which is really efficient at trying to help us cycle through our deck. Then on top of that, it also has the capability of deleting one of the opponent's low-level Digimon, so it's another card that's also good at sniping those floodgates to enable us to make our plays possible. Then its security ability activates its main, so similarly to Heir of Dragons, it's also going to allow us to try to draw when it's checked in security as well, unlike Hero of the Skies, which is why I'm prioritizing running more copies of these than Hero of the Skies. And then the last option of the deck is kind of a tech or flex spot, and that's going to be 1 copy of Crimson Blaze. So Crimson Blaze, the wider the opponent's field, the cheaper this card becomes, which is pretty decent at times at being able to just get you out of some sticky situations. And it also could stop some of the opponent's potential plays from them trying to play Digimon by card effects, potentially slowing their deck down, while also being a pretty decent security threat. But if you wanted to, you could also think about running Death Exmon in its place to try to accomplish a similar goal. And then lastly, onto the Tamers, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Yuuya Kuga. So Yuuya is going to be the deck's dedicated memory setting tamer, which is actually pretty important, making sure that we're at 3 memory, so that way we could always have the ability to hard play our MetalGreymon, utilizing his Digicross ability to be able to start swinging and being aggressive with. Then the benefit for utilizing this card is the combination between him and MetalGreymon X Antibody with our MetalGreymon, so we could proc his ability to be able to gain 2000 extra DP and stop our Digimon from being affected by the opponent's options, making it even safer for our Digimon to swing into the opponent's security. So with our full stack, we should have a MetalGreymon that has 11,000 DP. With this, it'll make it 13,000 DP, swinging for 2 to 3 checks at the opponent's security. Just makes this card really good for how the deck wants to play in terms of what the combo is. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of the Tri-Tamer. So this is just a pretty decent card at being able to gain some extra advantage in value while enabling us to be able to use whatever is underneath our tamers to Digicross with into our MetalGreymon. So at the start of our main phase, we get to cycle our Blue Flare or Crossheart traded Digimon to be able to gain an extra memory and draw a card. So if we do just see too many of our Blue Flare pieces, then we could use this card to start cycling through our deck even more with a more potential value off of that 1 extra memory that this card is going to be giving us. Then, like I stated before, this is going to allow us to Digicross into our MetalGreymon utilizing any materials that's underneath our tamers, which is pretty decent at times because this card is also going to help us add sources to him, so that way we could try to throw some of our combo pieces underneath and try to dig for some of our other cards to try to make the deck flow as best as it possibly can. And then before I get into the combo portion of the video explaining how the deck actually is supposed to work, the mild success that I was referencing was me participating in one of Eggman's monthly events to practice for regionals to see if this is something I wanted to take to regionals or not. So I ended up participating, and I think I did pretty well, ending up in 4th place. As far as the overall size of the event, I'd say it's on the more medium size. It was 44 players with 5 rounds. And in the 5 rounds, my matchup breakdown was the following. I faced off at round 1 against Jesmon, beat him 2-0. Faced off round 2 against Dorbikmon. That was my only loss. He OTK'd me before I could OTK him. Then going into round 3, I faced off against a Grandis player, and I OTK'd him before he could OTK me. Then against my round 4 opponent, it was ZeigGreymon, and ZeigGreymon, that was actually a pretty decent match, but I ended up squeezing out the win. And my last match was against Crosshearts, and again, that was another decently even match, and I was just barely able to squeeze out the win there as well. And then, as far as the overall game plan and gameplay of the deck goes, it is a pretty simple deck at first, but it does have some intricacies on when and how you want to utilize your cards. So as far as just some of the basics when it comes to the level 3s, because we're rarely going to be digivolving, it doesn't necessarily matter which level 3 that we want to start with, but ideally we're going to want to use the Guilmon that's going to draw us when it attacks on top of our Gigimon, so that way when we raise it out, we're going to swing and we're going to draw 2 cards, which is a pretty decent level of consistency in cycling. So you could do the same type of maneuver with a Guilmon X Antibody, digivolving it on top of here and moving it out to swing. You're only going to get 1 draw, but still 1 draw is better than nothing. Then if you wanted to, you could even just think about utilizing the Guilmon out of raising to digivolve into Guilmon X Antibody if we actually need to use his when digivolving ability. And don't be afraid to do this, just because transactionally, if you know the card's only going to live up 1 turn, we're still going to get 2 draws this way by digivolving and swinging versus just swinging here. So off of our rookies and all of the different ways that we can play them, we still have some pretty decent level of card draw to try to make our deck as consistent as we possibly can. In the rare occasions that you actually do want to, you can digivolve your Guilmon or your Guilmon X Antibody into a Greymon, so that way if you needed to, you could digivolve it into a MetalGreymon or move it out and utilize that MetalGreymon. That is a possible line of play, but it's not necessarily the most optimal line of play. Instead, most of the time, what we're doing is just utilizing all of these different ways to be able to draw cards to make sure that we see as many cards as we possibly can to set up our combo, just because we do need a decent amount of pieces for our combo. So our combo is going to involve digicrossing into a MetalGreymon. So digicrossing into MetalGreymon requires either a Greymon or a MailBirdramon. So we mostly don't necessarily want to use the Blue Flare Greymon, just because most of the time the opponent is going to try to play around it, not necessarily having more than 1 Digimon on the field, making the ability to be able to multi-attack essentially useless, which is why this Greymon is the one that we're running more of and we want to see more of, so that way we could digicross here, be able to swing with Rush right away, and be able to deal some decent damage at the same time. So this is our ideal stack when it comes to what we want to build, and we're going to want to try to have our Yuuya out on the field, so that way he's always going to be hard setting us to 3. So with just our Yuuya out, we could digicross for 3, go to 0, get into this MetalGreymon, and then from here, we're going to want to digivolve our MetalGreymon into a MetalGreymon X Antibody. That's going to allow us to suspend the Yuuya to give him an extra DP, so that way when we're swinging with this card, he's going to be 13k, which is, for a level 5, pretty powerful, and it's going to be allowing us to check 3 checks, essentially turning off the opponent's options. So if we do the 3 checks off of this, which is pretty powerful right out of the gates off of 3 memory. It's not exactly in OTK territory, which is why the Taiki, Kiriha, and Nene and Gravity Crush is really important to be able to gain some extra memory. So from this type of a position, if we actually started our turn off with 4 because we used Taiki, Kiriha, and Nene to gain an extra memory, then we're going to digicross, make that same exact swing, and if the opponent has enough Digimon in play, that's going to allow us to basically digivolve for 1 into a ZeigGreymon, unsuspend our ZeigGreymon, swing, taking the last 2 security off of the opponent, and then from here, this is where Blitz Omnimon comes in to be able to unsuspend again and be able to swing for the game off of this. But what I found myself doing most of the time isn't even necessarily going all the way up into Zeig and into Omnimon. Most of the time, I actually just stopped here because I would put my opponent to 2 security as early as I possibly can, utilizing some good early game chips with my Guilmon to try to draw some extra cards as early as I possibly can, and I even found myself hard playing the Greymon to again either grab back the MetalGreymon or try to dig through my deck for it, and because this is just a Greymon chilling on the field, it makes cards like Heir of Dragon pretty decent to use, on top of the fact that we could start chipping away, and if this is gonna just sit in our hand and we're unable to play it, then like I stated, if we just have extra blue flare combo pieces, then we could start to throwing them underneath, or if we recognize we're in a position where we can't really use ZeigGreymon efficiently, then we also could tuck it underneath our tamer to be able to start racking up some extra cycling and extra memory to be able to make more powerful plays possible that way. So from this type of a position, if I just had everything in place, I put my opponent at 0 security because I chipped 2 security, swung 3 with this. That's again where Gravity Crush and the Taiki, Kiriha, and Nene come into handy to be able to have some extra memory gain to actually make sure that we could use ZeigGreymon even when we can't digivolve him for cheap. So it's not necessarily the easiest OTK deck to set up and play. There is a decent amount of intricacies, and you do have to kind of evaluate what you have and what you need, but the majority of the actions is just going to sit with a Digimon or Digitama out and raising. Make sure you have access to red to be able to play your options to draw you some extra cards and be able to utilize your combo when you need to. And I found myself playing the tamer not necessarily super early on, just because in the early turns I want to try to draw as many cards as I possibly can, but the turn right before I am going to be trying to kill the opponent is usually when I'm going to try to set up a Yuuya. Unless I don't have anything to draw, then I'll try to set up the Yuuya anyway, just because I don't have necessarily anything else to do. But I do think that it's a pretty fun and unique deck at taking advantage of a lot of different mechanics in the game, using them in some pretty unconventional ways to be able to squeeze out some wins, and this actually could surprise the opponent because they might not necessarily know or see what you're trying to do until it's too late. Then I do have to give credit where credit is due, and I did kind of borrow a lot of the ideas from Rexy over in Indonesia as a deck list that I saw online, and I thought that was pretty cute and could possibly theorize a way to be able to play it now in BT11/BT12 versus when the deck was made in EX4, just because EX4 adds some more parts and pieces and tools for us to utilize, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't still theoretically play the deck now, and I did make some alterations to be able to fit it more towards my personal playstyle and preferences versus the original build. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.